How I survived, why did I survive, what's the reason I survived? Luck. My name is Vera Gara. I was born on the 1st of May, 1933. At the beginning of the war, I was 5. First we lived in Vienna. I was born there in 1933, and we had to leave 38, 39 after the Anschluss because my father was arrested on charges of fraud. The factory which he owned, it's a salami factory. The truth is that he was arrested because he was a Jew, and the factory had to be taken away from him because the Anschluss. Before the war, my life, being an only child, I had a nanny because both of my parents were working in the factory on the same ground actually, but I had a little house in the back with swings and a sandpit and so on and so forth. And in that little house, that was my dolls and everything I needed to play with. And my nanny was there, and I had a very happy life. And my father came to see me occasionally during the day, and I always said, when I grow up, I want to be a father rather than my mother, because my mother never came to see me. She was too busy in the office. And until 1938, there was no interruption. We went all over the place. With my parents, I went occasionally to my uncle's place in Austria. He had a sanatorium there, but we could have a holiday there. When the war broke out, my mother told me we have to leave. I had to choose one doll. We got on the train. Also, my nanny got on the train. She's supposed to come with us, but at the border, Austrian-Hungarian border, she turned back. And so my mother and I went to Budapest, but from Budapest we traveled down to the city where we lived until we came away in the 50s. My grandmother had an apartment there, but it was a huge house and with several apartments. And when she was alone, then she cut the 7-room to 3-room, and that's the 3-room we occupied when we got there. She was already sick, she was in hospital, so that's where we stayed until after 3 months my father was let go from the prison and he was allowed to join us in Szeged. They hid as much as they could from me, everything. And don't forget, that time, 70 years ago, or even more, nearly 80, there was no such a thing that young children could read the paper or listen to the radio. Or yes, we did have a radio. Yes, my parents had newspapers. Not everybody had radio and of course telephones and so on, but my parents did. And I know incidents when they were sitting around the radio listening to the English broadcast, which again was not allowed once the war broke out, and especially not for Jews. But they did listen to the Hungarian-speaking English broadcast from London, so that they knew more or less what's going on in the world. But I remember them sitting around, and I remember when my father took me outside the house, which was a bungalow, or still is standing, and it became a hotel just a year ago or so, 2 years ago, I don't know. And that he said, you see, we don't hear anything outside. When people ask you what we are listening to, tell them we listen to music. Because it was not allowed to listen to English broadcast. We lived opposite the synagogue, and the Jewish school, which Jewish elementary school I attended once I became 6 years old. And but being Jewish was being Jewish. When the ghetto started and our house became ghetto, and the wall, the 2-meter wooden wall was put up around our house, way down, which was ghetto, and the Jews who didn't live in this area were taken in to the ghetto, and we, in our 3-room, not 3 bedrooms, 3-room, 1 little room in the back of the kitchen, belonged to 17 people. So in every room there were 3 or 4 people, and there was 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen, and they had to do with, you know. But I never heard any quarrels or loud words. Well, surely I must have felt that something not right, but more or less at that given stage, I wasn't really inconvenienced because I got everything what needed to be given. I'm sure that they put up a certain timing, who can use the bathroom, because there was only 1 toilet and 1 bathroom for 17 people. 1 room was occupied by my father, my mother, and myself, and the middle room, which was the so-called dining room, was occupied by 2 families, my doctor and his wife and her parents, and my room was occupied by a mother, a daughter, and a grandmother. And then there was the little room behind the kitchen, which used to be for the maid, which was occupied by a woman with her 2 children, a boy and a girl. The wall was in front of our windows, and somebody high up, and one of the Nazis, Hungarian gendarmes, came down to check whether it's high enough. And the other side of the wall was already occupied by non-Jews, so the window was painted in white, so we couldn't look out to see the non-Jews on the other side. And because it is so long ago, the upbringing of children were not to ask. They did what their parents told them. We could play in the yard. We couldn't go out because we could go where the ghetto is, but we couldn't go into town or somewhere. There were certain hours when the adults were allowed to go shopping, 2 hours, but there was a gentleman, Mr. Todt, who was the manager of the delicatessen shop Meindl, and he came to the ghetto door, and the people could ask him, give him money, and ask him to bring things back to the ghetto. We were in the ghetto only a couple of weeks, and then my father, who was overlooking everybody, he was in charge of, was told that we have to pack whatever we can carry. The lights at that time in the ghetto were turned off, and he went over a couple of walks away to the second rabbi, Rabbi Frankel, and asked him to come to our home into the cellar where 120 people waited for him. A lot of people at that time converted, committed suicide. The priests from the outside came in and said, when you convert, then we save you, which was a lie. And it never did anything. So my father went over to Rabbi Frankel and asked him to come to speak to these people who would like to have his opinion. And he said, don't hold on to a straw, because it's not going to work. My father tested me. When we went up in our room on the stairs, he said to me, Emanuel Löw, the great, great rabbi practically of the world, the Golem Löw, way back in Czechoslovakia and so on. And my father said to me, he's converting. I said, well, I'm not really interested. He's very old. He said, but Frankel is going to convert. Frankel was the second rabbi in the city. And I loved him very much. He said, well, but when I go upstairs in my room, I will say the Shema, which is the major prayer of our Jewish religion. We had a good friend who converted in the 20s and still died in Auschwitz, so it didn't help. After the ghetto, we went to the brick factory. We had to leave within a couple of hours. At the community center, we were searched, and the men searched the women, and the women searched the men naked, which was also a type of punishment. And we landed, all of us, even from the smaller towns and villages where Jews lived, they brought them in to the brick factory. We only took what we could carry, and it was summer, of course, it was June, and May, June, and we children could run around within the brick factory. And once I came back to where my parents were, my mother said to me, your prayer book, your watch, and your little book where a lot of people, friends of my parents, my teachers, my father wrote in the book to remember, had to be given up. I said, oh, where is it? So she showed me the big basket, and a man in uniform stood behind it. And so I went over to there and looked in the basket, took my 3 things out of there, and told the man, they belong to me, and I am taking it. So he looked at me and he said, you can. I didn't realize that he had the power to refuse me or whatever. So I took it. How my mother kept the 3 things, don't ask me, because I don't know. Well, we were shipped in again 2 cattle cars, 83 of us in 1 cattle car, and that was June and hot. We were sitting on top of each other, and a lot of people went crazy. There was my pediatrician's mother, who was a lovely lady, and she demanded a bathtub in the cattle car from her son. And of course, a bathtub in the cattle car was not exactly the thing what you could give her. And so he gave her an injection to calm her down. A lot of them died, and then the first stop, when they opened the door, they threw them just out on the street, and we went on. We went for a couple of days, stopped, but the doors were never opened. And you know, a cattle car is a cattle car where you deliver animals or goods, but it's not for humans. And we landed in Strasshof, which is Austria, and a huge field. That's the first time I saw my father cry. I have never seen him cry. And we stayed there because they grouped us in different little bigger groups, and we were sent, 17 of us. My father could choose the people whom he wanted in his group. Why? I don't know. And then we arrived to a small city, and from there we were taken by a truck to Leutzendorf, which is a small village, 120 people. Even today, 120 people, farmers, live there. And our group was given a huge room up on the hill in the barn, which barn became a home. Now I have seen it. And the adults went, not the two old people, but the rest of them, and not the children. We were only 3 of us, children, and I went to the woods to cut trees. My mother went down to the village on her day off and knocked at the door, and a farmer's lady came out, woman came out, and said, "What you want?" My mother said, "I have money, I can pay you, I want bread and butter and milk," and so on. Her little daughter, who unfortunately just died 2 months ago, and I go back to that because we are still in touch with the whole family, and said to my mother, the little girl, my age, she was a year older, and said to my mother, "I have goats, they belong to me, and I will bring up the milk every night when it's dark and nobody sees me, and I will provide the milk." After 70 years, we renewed our friendship. We visit them, they visit us, the whole family. The great-grandchildren treat us as family. The little girl just 2 months ago stood outside the house and said, "When are they coming? When are they coming? They are not here yet." And she is 12. We went to another work camp to Spitz an der Donau, and from Spitz an der Donau, that was already September, we stayed there a couple of weeks, and then we started out again in a cattle car and landed in Bergen-Belsen on the 8th of December. We had to walk from Hanover, which is a big industrial city, Germany, 9 kilometers to Bergen-Belsen. And we walked in, and on the right-hand side, there were loads of people with striped uniform. We did not, and that's very important, we did not know about Auschwitz, we did not know about the gas chambers. We had no paper, no radio, no nothing, and nobody told us anything. When they started screaming at us as we walked in from the gate to our accommodation, to our barracks, they said to us, don't go and have a shower because it's gas. Now they looked so awful that we thought they are nuts. They lost it. So we didn't believe them. And yes, we did have a shower, but because I'm here, so it wasn't gas. We went to the so-called family barracks. So the family actually stayed together. On the way to Bergen-Belsen, my father was beaten. He was 61. He lost face. That was the really main reason why he gave up. They put him to the next barracks to us, and luckily the guy who stood by the gate took my mother, in a Nazi uniform, took my mother every morning and every evening to him. So in the morning he came and took my mother to the other barracks. We couldn't just walk out from our surrounding. There were about 200 people in that barrack, and there were quite a few teachers, and the teachers took us aside and entertained us. I mean, we had no paper, pencil or anything else, but it was good for them and good for us that the time was going faster. The funny part is that I never felt real fear. In the night when I had to go to the washroom, it was outside, and I had to walk there. You know, there was no washroom in the barracks. And the reflector from the Nazi guy was in my back. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of them. I went and did and went back to the... When my father died, that was the night before my mother's birthday, and they brought him over, and there was a bench, and my mother gave some bread to a woman who had a white sheet, so he was actually, in the Jewish religion, he was actually not buried, but cremated. They cremated everybody because of health reasons, and there was no such a thing as burial in the tradition of the Jewish religion. I mean, to any race, religion, or anything, it should not happen again, because that was something which we really cannot understand, how that was allowed from the world, that it had been gone so far. Why do I do it? Because the world has to learn. They haven't learned yet. And I'm very positive, and I hope that with us telling the story and showing them what has happened will never happen again.